November 1917. Western Front. British soldiers went to deliver food to a forward trench. They found an entire unit dead in silence, but there were no bullet wounds on the bodies. 300 men. In one night. Faces frozen in terror. Official records called it a gas attack, but the files were lying. The truth was much darker. And 107 years later, a journal found in a French museum changed everything. Subscribe to help us bring these forgotten files to light, because some truths never make it into history books. I'm going to tell you Lieutenant Arthur Mallory's story, a doctor's battle to protect humanity, and how memory was erased in one night. Paris, 2017. Archive specialist Marie Dubois was sorting through donated World War I artifacts at a small museum outside the city. Her fingers traced the leather spine of an old journal. Gold letters spelled out Letter Arthur Mallory, Ram C, 1917. She opened the first page. Shaky handwriting revealed a chilling message. If this journal is being read, it means I failed. The gas wasn't just killing. It was doing something much worse, taking us away from ourselves. Marie's coffee grew cold as she read on. What she discovered that day wasn't just a doctor's notes. It was evidence of a secret experiment that could have changed an entire war. Let me take you back to November 1917. The muddy trenches near Passchendaele had become a graveyard for Britain's youth. Lieutenant Arthur Mallory pressed his stethoscope against Private Henderson's chest. The 20-year-old had been coughing blood for 3 days. Mallory leaned close. "Rest easy, son," he whispered. "The morphine will help." Henderson's eyes searched the doctor's face. "Doc, will I see home?" Mallory nodded. "Yes." But Henderson never did. Another casualty of this endless war. Outside, November rain turned the battlefield into a swamp. By candlelight, Mallory wrote in his journal, "Day 847 of this madness. We're not just fighting Germans anymore. We're fighting despair itself." What Mallory didn't know was that despair would soon have a new face, and it would come from his own side. But the real shock wasn't the enemy they were fighting, it was who was experimenting on them. The next morning, Corporal Davies burst into the medical tent, his face pale as death. "Sir, something's wrong at Sector 7. The food runners, they found something terrible." Mallory grabbed his medical bag and followed Davies through the muddy communication trenches. The closer they got to Sector 7, the quieter it became. No rifle fire, no voices, just silence that made their skin crawl. When they reached the forward trench, Mallory saw what Davies meant. 300 British soldiers lay in their positions, eyes open, no wounds, no blood. But their faces were twisted in an expression Mallory had never seen. Not pain, not fear, something else, something like confusion. Mallory knelt in the mud. "Dear God, what happened here?" Davies shook his head. "Gas attack, sir. But there's no smell, no green clouds like usual." Mallory examined the nearest body. Sergeant Morrison, a veteran who'd survived 3 years of hell. His hands were frozen, clawing at his own head, as if trying to grab something that wasn't there. In Morrison's pocket, Mallory found a letter, half-written. It started normally, "Dearest Mary, I hope this finds you well." But then the handwriting changed, became erratic. The final lines read, "Who is Mary? Why am I writing to someone I don't know? Where am I? Who am I?" If a soldier could forget his own wife, what else had been erased from his mind? The real horror was still hidden beneath the mud and blood. And Mallory was about to uncover the most terrifying weapon ever created. What no one realized was that this wasn't about killing soldiers. It was about erasing them completely. As Mallory examined more bodies, a pattern emerged. Every soldier had died the same way, clawing at their heads, personal items scattered around the trench, photographs, letters, pocket watches, as if the men had suddenly forgotten what they meant. Near the command post, Mallory found Captain Reynolds slumped over a field telephone. The receiver was still in his hand. On his desk, an urgent message, half-typed, "Urgent to command, unknown gas deployment, not lethal gas. Repeat, not lethal. Something else. Soldiers forgetting names, faces, orders, request immediate, what was I saying?" The message ended there. Mallory's hands trembled as he picked up a strange metal canister near the German barbed wire. Chemical formulas covered its surface, but at the bottom in small print, Project Tabula Rasa, for authorized use only. And then he saw the most shocking thing of all. The canister bore British markings. The most terrifying part was still ahead. What Mallory discovered next would challenge everything he believed about the war, about his own side, and about the very nature of human memory. But the documents in that bunker revealed something that would make him question reality itself. Hidden in a supply bunker protected by a tarpaulin were documents, orders, signed by High Command. The papers revealed Project Tabula Rasa, a chemical weapon designed not to kill, but to erase memory. Deploy it on German trenches, wait for confusion to set in, then advance against enemies who couldn't remember how to fight. But something had gone wrong. The wind had shifted. The gas had blown back into British lines. 300 men had died not from poison, but from the complete erasure of their identities. They forgot their names, their families, their purpose. They forgot how to breathe, how to live. At the bottom of the file, a handwritten note made Mallory's blood freeze. Test successful. Memory erasure complete within 30 minutes. Recommend full deployment by Christmas. God save the King. Was this really a weapon, or something far worse? Mallory stared at the papers. They're using our own boys as test subjects, he whispered to himself. He had saved lives for 2 years, but this time saving meant lying. The documents revealed something even more sinister. This wasn't just about winning battles. It was about rewriting the very nature of war itself. What they never expected was that one man's conscience would survive longer than their cover-up. Project Tabula Rasa wasn't just a weapon. It was a new form of warfare. Erase enemy memories, then reprogram them. Turn German soldiers into British allies. Create armies that couldn't remember why they were fighting. But if memory itself could be stolen, what else could be rewritten? The final document was a deployment schedule. London planned to use the memory gas on massive scales across the Western Front. Millions of soldiers, both German and Allied, would lose their identities. Mallory realized the horrifying truth. His own command was willing to erase human consciousness itself to win the war. He had a choice. Report the incident as a German gas attack, as ordered, or expose the truth and be branded a traitor. In his journal, Mallory wrote, "I became a doctor to preserve life. But how do you preserve a life without memory, without identity? Are we still human if we can't remember being human? If humanity itself could be erased, who would be left to remember what we once were?" When Davies appeared at the bunker entrance, his voice was tight with worry. "Sir, Command wants your report on Sector 7. Mallory closed the files. "Tell them it was chlorine gas, German attack, standard casualties." But that night, by candlelight, Mallory wrote the truth. Every detail, every document, every horrific revelation. He sealed his journal and gave it to a French nurse named Sister Marie. Mallory looked into her eyes. "If something happens to me, make sure this reaches the world, someday." 3 days later, Lieutenant Arthur Mallory was reported missing in action. His body was never found, but his journal survived. And 100 years later, the truth he died for would finally surface. Back in Paris, 2017, Marie Dubois closed the journal with tears streaming down her face. She immediately contacted historians, military archives, and investigative journalists. Within months, corroborating evidence emerged. Chemical records, buried military files, testimony from descendants of soldiers who had exhibited strange memory problems after the war. The official story changed. The 300 soldiers of Sector 7 were no longer listed as casualties of German gas attacks. They became victims of their own side's experimentation. Arthur Mallory was posthumously honoured as a whistleblower who tried to protect human dignity in the darkest of times. His courage to document the truth had given voices back to 300 silent soldiers. And his final question echoes today. If memory makes us human, what happens when someone has the power to erase it? The journal now sits in the Imperial War Museum in London, a reminder that the greatest battles aren't always fought against the enemy across no man's land. Sometimes they're fought against those who would steal our very souls. These files waited 100 years to be told. Help more people hear these forgotten voices by sharing this story. Arthur Mallory's journal asks us a question that's more relevant today than ever. In a world where memory can be manipulated, where identity can be programmed, who decides what we're allowed to remember? These 300 men waited 100 years to be heard. Don't let their voices be buried again. Subscribe now. And today, as technology learns to manipulate memory and identity in new ways, Mallory's question is no longer history, it's prophecy. Because when memory itself becomes a weapon, forgetting becomes the real enemy. Some battles echo through time, and some heroes speak from beyond the grave.